Welcome back to Advancing with Amy. I'm Amy, mental health warrior and neurospicy mama. And today we're talking with Epiphany Jordan about the power of touch. Welcome, Epiphany.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to have you. I've been looking at your website and reading through your materials. I see you've written a book and you've got a lot going on. Tell us a little bit about why touch is so important and what that has to do with your work.
Okay. So I say that I'm on a mission to rebrand human touch. I think that the way that we think about touch doesn't work for many of us. And I would like to see us frame it differently, think about it differently so that it's more accessible and inclusive. I started on this journey a little more than 10 years ago. When I was living in Texas from 2013 to 2020, I had a hands-on touch business called Karuna Sessions, which was a ritual of human connection. And it involved two practitioners holding a client. It was beautiful and very emotionally satisfying for me to do. In 2019, I published the book you were talking about, Somebody Hold Me, The Single Person's Guide to Nurturing Human Touch, because I know that this is a topic that single people struggle with a lot. So some of them know it and some of them don't. A lot of us don't know that's the thing that we're looking for. And then in addition to recording podcasts, talking about this, I spoke at the South by Southwest Interactive Festival in Austin about solving loneliness with human touch. And then about a year later, the pandemic hit and it wasn't good to touch people anymore. So I ended up shutting down the business. And in 2021, I pivoted a little bit and decided to go to grad school. I got a master's in public health. I didn't know anything about public health or healthcare. I was kind of fringely on the health and wellness side of things, but it was a completely new world for me. And I tried to apply that to looking at this issue from a population level. The definition of public health is the prevention of disease in populations. And I think that touch is very overlooked. It's in public health's blind spot and it's in humanity's blind spot in a lot of ways. So I'm trying to apply the things I learned in school to this topic and having conversations with people about it.
That's fascinating because I was thinking when you said that some people know that they're missing out on that touch and some people don't. I've been single for, I think, 12 or 13 years now. And I don't feel lonely. I'm very happy with my life. But I wonder if there are things that I am not aware of by not getting that touch as often. My daughter is on the spectrum, and so she's not a big touchy-feely person.
Yeah, a lot of times I find a lot of times that people will be very defensive about it. As a therapist friend of mine says that it makes people angry because we need it so much. But think about the last time, not from your kid necessarily, but like the last time from an adult that you got a really, really good long hug. And it's just like, oh. I mean, do you remember the last time that happened?
It was a kid, but it's an adult, my adult son. He's 31. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, when he hugs me, I just hold on for dear life and like, oh, I'm so glad I get to hug you.
Yeah. It's like, well, a lot of times we don't know we're missing it until we have it. If they're having a rough time and somebody gives them a really long hug, they practically burst into tears because they're just like, oh my God, I need this. So, but too, I mean, people have different levels of need for touch. Just like people have different sex drives, I think they'll have different touch drives. Some people are just like, gimme. And some people are like, don't ever touch me. So,
yeah, I used to have a boss who would come up and she would always rub my neck and scratch my back and give me hugs without me knowing she was coming up behind me. And it made me a nervous wreck. So I think.
Oh, I can imagine. and then
that had a power dynamic to it, though.
I was just about to say, I've had this conversation. I have this dear friend he's a lovely, lovely, lovely man. He's just the sweetest guy in the world. And he was CEO of a company and he's like, it's really hard. I can't just go up and hug all my employees. And he's like, as much as I want to, because it's like, oh my God, I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for working with me. Let's have a cozy work environment. And to them, they're like, if I don't hug my boss, am I going to get fired? It's like, it means a different thing. And touch is definitely one of the ways that power imbalances and people trying to assert their power over others tends to show out.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about how not having enough touch in your life affects either your mental health or maybe even your physical health?
Yes. So there's a condition that's touch hunger or touch starvation, and it can make you not sleep well. It can make you anxious. It can make you depressed. It can make you very distrustful of other people. It can make you feel lonely. I find when I was doing hands-on work that a lot of times like people would be so tense and it's like you're isolated. I think it really gets people in their head. We all spend too much time in our heads as it is, but touch really gets us is one way of getting us more into our bodies. So I think as well, like it might be good to bring up at this point some of the physical benefits of health that you're not getting because you're not getting touch or its corresponding hormone that's produced in your body, oxytocin. Oxytocin and touch reduce inflammation. They counteract the effects of cortisol in your heart. They reduce your blood pressure. They raise your immune system. They can decrease appetite. They help with wound healing and pain relief. What else? There's not a lot of, there's not a ton of research on the mental health aspects of it, but I can tell you from doing tunnel parties or leading workshops at events and the way that people describe the way that they feel after they've had even a little bit of touch or a good amount of touch is blissful, happy, peaceful, content, satisfied, joyful, giddy. People laugh a lot more. It's like the world's pretty intense and stressful and serious. And it's a good way to get a little bit more playful and relaxed and give us a chance to be in our bodies and get back into a space of more childlike innocence.
Yeah, that's a lot of benefits you were mentioning. I'd never even thought about that. Oxytocin, isn't that a feel good emotion or kind of thing?
Yeah, they call it the trust molecule or the love molecule. There's been experiments done where people give them oxytocin. It makes them give people money or trust people more or what have you. Though it's also been found to have in-group bias. And it's like you trust all the people who are in your circle, which actually makes sense because Pitocin is actually, it's Greek for swift birth. Like Pitocin, synthetic oxytocin, they can give you shots to start contractions if you're to women who are in labor, it like helps them go through labor faster. And it's also really important for bonding after babies are born for mothers and fathers and infants. It's vital. And it's not just humans. It's present in all mammals. So
Yeah. When you had your business where you were doing the rituals, can you explain a little bit about what kind of ritual that was and how people got prepared to do something like that?
yeah. So Karuna sessions, I'll give you the background on how I got into it. In the early 2000s, I was studying sacred sexuality with a woman in Atlanta, Georgia, and she would go to pagan festivals and bring offerings around sex and sexuality. I attended a festival with her. She had a bunch of her students there doing things. And one of the offerings that we had was a Karuna session, which was a non-sexual, it was around non-sexual touch and it was very ritualized. And I was just like the reactions that people were having were just, oh my God, this feels so good. And people were in tears and just really, really responded well to it. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. several years later, I started playing around with the format with a friend of mine, and we ended up turning it into a business. And so the client would come in. It was always done with two practitioners so that instead of feeling like you're going to have a sexual experience, which is what we usually think of when two adults are touching each other, especially if they're in a private location, a private room. So we would do it with two practitioners, and the client would feel like they were a king or a queen being waited on hand and foot, because it's such a big deal to have a stranger touch us. That's drilled into us from a very young age that we don't let strangers touch us. We had to bring them in very gently. So we would bless them. We would wash their feet. We would have them meditate. We would have them change into ritual garments. We would explain everything every step of the way. We had boundaries. We had safe words. We would talk about it so that when it came time to like actually do the hands-on part where they were just receiving, they felt like, okay, these people are aware that this is kind of a big deal. And if I ask them to stop, they will. And so we do really light touch on their face, their hands, their arms, their belly, their legs, their feet. We would roll them over onto their back, and then we would hold them in between us in a way that mimicked the feeling of being held by your mother as an infant. And it was always really quiet. We were really focused on just giving to them and having them just be receiving. Like every once in a while, somebody would be like, "Oh, can I rub your back while we're in this cuddle?" And we were like, "No, don't think about us. Don't talk. Just lay there and receive," which is really hard for a lot of people to do. And by the time we got done, people were just melted on the bed or they were asleep. They were really, really relaxed. And we would leave them for a bit and then wake them up and ask them to change back into their street clothes and then serve them some tea and cookies and send them on their way.
Wow, it really sounds beautiful. I'm thinking, though, that there's got to be a lot of people, like you said, that some cry. It's got to be such an emotional release. And I'm sure
Yeah.
sometimes you end up getting told a lot of things.
People wouldn't really talk to us that much. The place where people would always lose it is when we would start touching their face, because it's like, have you touch your kid's face when you're putting them to sleep at night? And it's like nobody's had that experience in years. Maybe you have a partner who has done that for you. But speaking of therapists, I received training from the Institute for Mind Body Therapy. Susan Kay, who's out of Texas, trains surrogate partners, and it's called the triadic model of therapy. The way that it works is the therapist and the client talk, and then the client goes to the surrogate. They do their thing, and then the surrogate gives back a report to the therapist, and then the client goes back to the therapist and they process and talk about it. And then the therapist can say, "Hey, next time you're together, can you work on this or that?" And again, we really discourage talking. There's lots of places where you can go to talk. There's lots of places where you can go to look at beautiful things or taste beautiful things or whatever. But it's like, but there's really not a lot of places you could go for touch. For years, I did research on sex work and sex workers, and a lot of accounts that you read from sex workers, they're talking about these guys come in and they just want to be held. They don't even want to have sex. And it's a really hard thing to get.
I can imagine that's something very needed in this world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell me about the tea and cookies afterwards? Do they open up then? What is that, just like a brief thing and then they leave?
Yeah, sometimes people talk to us. Sometimes they were pretty quiet. We try to check in with them afterwards to see how they were doing. Sometimes it would be a little bit weird because it's like, here you are, you just had this really intimate experience, and then, oh, you're going to like sit down on a couch with somebody and just hang out. And yeah,
Right.
so
That's interesting. Do you ever think about doing that again? Having another business like that?
all the time. I learned a lot about marketing when I was in school. So I would probably do it differently. When I had the business, we really struggled with trying to figure out who our customers were and what we should be talking about and focusing on, what barriers we had to lower for people to come in and talk to us. I did some partnerships with therapists. It would have been nice to have.
So I'm wondering, have you noticed when you were talking about who your market audience is, or your, I don't want to say audience, but your members, did you notice whether it was more male or more female, for instance, that needed that?
Well, I think in our world as general, in a general way, men tend to be more touch starved. Women tend to be more physical with their friends. And I think it's harder for guys, but I'd say we had some of both. I was actually surprised this was gonna might blow your mind. One of our most enthusiastic groups of customers was new mothers.
Oh,
Yeah. You'd think you're like, oh, mom's like getting all this touch all the time. They're like holding their baby all the time, but it's like, they're giving touch, they're not receiving touch. I always described it as we were making a deposit into their overdrawn nurturing bank accounts. So it's here, you're giving, giving, giving all day. That's one of the things about caregivers is that they're supposed to give selflessly, which I call bullshit on. It's a question I ask a lot of myself is who mothers the mothers? If I have a friend who has a new baby, everybody wants, oh, here, let me help the baby. And I'm like, can I do your dishes? Can I do your laundry? Can I sweep your floor? It's hard for mothers to give selflessly because they're juggling so many balls most of the time. And in the past, new mothers would have had their family around them, their aunts, their mothers, their grandmothers who were there to pick up the slack and cook and clean and do things for them while they laid in bed and nursed. And these days, what people are going back to work after 6 weeks after having a baby, it's garbage.
yeah, that's hard. I also think the elderly are struck really hard. I work in a lot of nursing
Big
facilities
time.
as well, and they're stuck in there, and sometimes family does not stop by very often. And so they
Yeah,
just
I'm
make sure they're touch starved.
Oh, big time. You're absolutely right that the elderly are very touch starved. My mother actually just moved into assisted living, and I'm talking to their activities director about coming in and either doing a workshop where I'm teaching them to touch each other or where I'm coming in and doing something like Karuna sessions, but just like a few minutes of it where they're sitting in a chair. That's a business idea I've had for quite a while, and I keep running into liability. But I've noticed actually the place where my mom lives it's pretty high end, and the staff there touches the residents quite a bit. They're pretty heavy with them and stuff. Yeah, I love that. But yes, one of the primary ways that elderly folks used to get their touch needs met was living in multi-generational households and taking care of the kids. My mom did that when I guess she had been a widow for 4 years when my 3 or 4 years when my niece was born. And she took care of her a lot. And I think it was really helpful for her and for my brother and sister-in-law. So
Oh, yeah. My grandchildren, I have 3 grandchildren, and I'm a big proponent of asking if it's okay for a hug. And if their parents say, go hug grandma, I say,
like
no,
that.
only if they want to, because sometimes they don't want to. But
Yeah,
usually they
good
do.
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love their
Yeah.
hands.
Oh, of course. I know my niece is no, she just turned 13. So she's still in Tweenlandia. And my mom laments that she's not a little girl anymore and not as snuggly and huggy. And I mean, she does still hug Nana, but it's not as much and probably not as much. Today, my mom was having a really bad day and I was trying to get her to lay down and take a nap. And I probably should have just climbed into bed with her and snuggled up with her. And I had to be somewhere, but it's the elderly is definitely, I mean, there's a lot of groups that don't get touched. Almost half of Americans are single. I just found a statistic. I think it was from Pew Research Trust. I've seen a lot of their research on relationships and things. And I think I saw that 56% of single Americans have not had sex in the past year.
Wow.
I
Do
know everybody thinks that they're hooking up, but they're not. And
mm,
a lot of hookup sex is not tender. It's not sweet. It's not loving.
right.
And it's like, why bother?
Right. So you don't get that nurturing and that and same
No,
emotional release. So what do you think happened during the COVID period? Do you think that had a drastic effect on people's mental health at all?
I think it did. I was thinking about this thing around using human touch to solve loneliness for a few years. And when I went to grad school and started doing academic research, I'm like, why is nobody talking about this? And during COVID, there were a few people who were publishing articles about, hey, we did all this physical distancing, social distancing, and it was before they really knew how COVID was passed around. It was necessary to prevent the spread of disease, but at what price? I lived alone during the pandemic. I was single. I didn't really have a pod. I was really happy about 3 months into the pandemic. The New York Times published an article where they talked to a lot of doctors and they're like, yeah, you can probably hug outdoors and if you don't breathe on each other because it's a respiratory virus. I would hug people outdoors
Yeah.
or hug people with masks on. My social life became going for walks with people living in Austin. The weather's nice most of the year. And so I walk 2 to 4 miles a day. And a lot of times I did it with friends. So
Great.
I think it really showed a lot of people how isolated they were. And also I think it showed a lot of people like how much we do get from just small amounts of touch or casual touch, like being able to go out for happy hour or cocktails with your friends, brunch, and giving a hug, hello, goodbye. It was like that kind of stuff all disappeared. And people were like, whoa, okay, yeah. And I definitely saw and heard some friends who were pretty isolated,
Mm,
their anxiety was really through the roof about the pandemic and this illness that's going around and am I going to die and how do I prevent myself from getting it? Because there wasn't really good information. A lot of people feel like the public health establishment, especially the CDC, kind of face planted. They didn't do a good job of communicating with the public about what to do. I think it was really hard on people. Actually, I have a story about this. My house in Texas has a guest house and I'd done Airbnb for years and I was not going to be doing that during the pandemic. So I ended up renting it out to a friend and she was really, really nervous about the pandemic. I could barely get her to talk to me from 10 feet away from each other on the deck. And she was just really anxious and freaked out, scared, and all these things, very, very traumatized. And one morning I was working and I heard the sounded like a dog fight outside. And I went running outside and she had a pit bull who had been tied to the railing and the collar broke when another dog was walking by and he went running over and attacked the dog. And it took 4 people to get the dog separated and her finger got bitten really badly and stuff. And she was crying and crying and crying. And I was like, do you want a hug? And she was like, yeah. She had been so anxious and nervous, but she like hit this crisis point where it was like, okay, I'm willing to take a risk on somebody touching me because I just feel so alone. And usually she would get comfort from her dog, but she was really angry with her dog at the time for breaking free and attacking this other dog. Sometimes it's the simplest and best way to comfort somebody or make somebody feel like they're not alone, that they're not going through it alone, give them some nervous system regulation. Yeah,
yeah. And I think that not getting that touch, it definitely plays with your mental health and I would think your physical.
absolutely. Yeah, it does. People just get really isolated. They just get in their own world. They can be like very angry and paranoid. I've had people, it's kind of like you're trapped in this tower, in this castle in your head. and everybody and everything else is out there. And I think that most of us spend too much time in our heads as it is.
Right.
And it's a good way to like ground you and bring you back to earth and bring you back to humaning. We have cells in our skin that are designed to register emotions. We have what are called we have some cells that register what's called discriminatory touch, which is this hot, cold, rough, smooth, hard, soft, whatever. And then we have these cells that register affective touch, which is touch that conveys emotions. So it's the simplest thing. When you think about the fact that our skin is the largest organ in our body.
What do you recommend to people who maybe are touch starved and they're lonely and they don't have friends and family around? Does your book address that at all?
It does. The book was really designed for people. I mean, I know a lot of single people who have really great communities and good friends and stuff. So it's designed to help them get through that hump and get to a place where they can share touch with their friends. But I do have a section on how to deal with it as a person who's alone or single or doesn't have friends and family. I will say that there's not a one size fits all. It's going to look different for every person. And you could do things that are socially sanctioned ways to touch, to get your touch needs met. You could go get a pedicure or a facial or get a haircut or a massage. And I know these things are expensive for a lot of people. A lot of people, it's a luxury. If you're in it more for the touch than what it's going to look like, maybe going to pretty much every town has a beauty school where you can go get services for very cheap where students are learning on you. I wouldn't recommend them necessarily cutting and coloring your hair without a lot of supervision, but you could go and just get your hair shampooed and stuff. You could take a dance class. You could join a sports team, improv or contact improv, blues dancing. There's a lot of different things like that include a lot of touch. You could sign up to cuddle premature babies in the hospital. They have groups of people who cuddle premature infants. They've found that infants gain weight more quickly and their organs develop more quickly, and it gets them out of the hospital faster. So that is a volunteer gig that's out there. See, what else could you do? If you live in a bigger city, a lot of times there are people who do what are called cuddle parties, where you go and it's a group of people and it's a little workshop at first, and they teach you about boundaries and negotiations, and then you get set free. And there's a couple hours where you cuddle or rub each other's shoulders or feet or hold hands or whatever. Do not discount the power of a tiny amount of touch, holding hands or standing shoulder to shoulder with somebody or having somebody put their hand on your shoulder, like just that little amount of contact. And that's also, I think, a lot of times easier for people to get a little tiny bit of touch and then, oh, okay, this feels safe. This feels good. Okay, maybe I can try a little bit more. It's hard. There's not a lot of stuff that's out there, but I think that asking for it is a good thing. You could ask a doctor or a nurse for a hug or something. People do that as well. But yeah, there's
Sorry. How do you find a cuddle
oh,
party?
I would just search cuddle party and the name of your city. There are professional cuddlers as well who will see people one on one. It's There's more of them every day. There's a great website called Cuddlist that lists a lot of them. But again, you can go for professional cuddlers. There's a couple websites that list them that are kind of shady. That looks like they're friends for sex workers or what have you. And the prices look like that as well. Yeah, that was the government doing the Boston Sesto laws where they shut down a lot of the websites where women who were working online, finding clients online as escorts, they shut them all down. People have had to get more creative with that. I don't like the implication of there being a crossover between professional cuddlers and sex workers. I all for sex work. I think it serves a really great purpose, but you should not confuse the one with the other. There's probably aren't, just like there are massage therapists who offer more erotic massages. I'm sure that there are professional cuddlers who offer stuff more, but that should not be the assumption. If you're going to a
Right.
professional cuddler, that's what you should be expecting.
I wonder if sex workers, when you're talking about that, if they get a benefit of that touch or if it's just a sexual thing.
Do they get a benefit from touching people a lot while having sex with them? I'm sure they do. That is one of our primary ways in our culture of how we're supposed to get touch is through sex or sleeping in a bed with somebody at night. Hearing about people who've been married for a really long time and their spouse dies. My parents were married for 46 years, I think. Hard to not have that physical body, that reassurance of somebody else is here with me.
Yeah, I've actually heard that's the second worst thing that can happen to somebody in their life. And the first thing would be to lose a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. People always talk about happily ever after love. And it's if you're married till death do us part, then somebody's going to have their heart broken really badly
Yeah.
when you get to the end of it. I'm sure that sex workers do get a lot out of having a lot of touch, having a lot of physical contact, and they get skin to skin contact. A lot of what I'm talking about is not skin to skin. So
Right.
unless you're holding hands with someone.
Well, I've even seen, and I'm sure you have too, that the newborns, even if they're not in the NICU or something like that, they're pushing, hey, take off your shirt and put them on your skin, have skin to skin contact with your baby because it's a bonding thing as well.
Yeah. And that after infants are born, their brains are forming all these neurological connections for the first couple of years, and having secure attachment with your parents and getting a lot of touch the first couple of years of life will have lifelong benefits of emotional regulation and better attachment and ability to bond with people. And I read an article a while back. Everybody was talking about many years ago the Romanian orphanages
Mm-hmm.
where there were just rows and rows and rows of babies that they were growing out without much human contact and nurturing, and like following up with some of these people like 30 years later, and so many emotional problems, so much anger and cutting big drama, storming out and disowning the family and things when they had been adopted. It was pretty intense.
Yeah.
So
Well, I have
yeah.
to tell you that before talking to you, I'd thought about people being lonely before, but I'd never thought about touch and how that plays into that. So this is
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, I wish that there would be more research about it. Faculty advisor was like, "Are you going to get your PhD?" And I was like, "No." Yeah, I didn't want to be an academic. I'm still trying to figure out. I would actually like to. I'm trying to figure out how I can do some research. I'd like to be gathering some data on single people and touch or lack thereof, because I haven't, I just don't think that there's much. So I'm trying to figure out how I can do that without being an academic and publishing it,
Yeah.
having
Well,
that rigorous scientific. I learned how to do it, but I'm definitely 2 years of school did not make me an expert in any stretch of the imagination.
I
So,
think the study would need to be a long-term study because I know that for myself, I've been divorced for about 13 years now. And when I first got divorced, I was very lonely. And
yeah,
over the years, I have become very independent and I am very happy with my life now. But I remember the
yeah,
lonely times.
yeah. Well, I think you see that's why a lot of times when people split up, that they're out dating, maybe trying to hook up right away or what have you. There's no other way to get that kind of touch. And then, of course, a lot of times people find that the touch through that is not satisfying, or They say they want sex, but they really want touch. But yeah, you definitely get to a place where you're like, oh, okay, I can go with less of this, but I think it's different for different people as well.
Yeah.
Some people are really touchy-feely and they run out and get into another relationship right away and to help serve, meet that need. Or maybe they get really lonely and they have to have companionship because they don't know how to do it other ways.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating. How do people find you or get a hold of you? Or
Yeah. So my website is www.nurturinghumantouch.com. There's links to the book on the website, but it's also available on all the various platforms. You can get it a print copy, an e-reader copy, or there's also an audiobook. The website also has links to my socials. I don't post as much as I should, unfortunately. And what else? Oh, one thing I want to say, I haven't put the page up yet, but one of the things I was able to do while I was in grad school is get certified as a health and wellness coach. And I love talking to people about this topic and helping them figure out how to get more touch in their lives. It's like people come up with these incredible, creative solutions that I would have never thought about because I don't live inside their lives. But sometimes it's helpful to have somebody to talk about this with and brainstorm about it. So
do you do a coaching kind of session with that? Is that something they can do Zoom with you or?
Exactly. Yeah. Because I'm not doing in-person touch or cuddling or anything. But yeah, let me help you figure out, let's look at your resources and, what you have available to you wherever you are so that you can figure out how to get it for yourself through whatever channels there might be. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming today. Is there anything that you'd like to just say as last words to our audience? Anything you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, I think that this is a big idea for people to have to think about. And I think a lot of times you have to really, really think it through for yourself. Like, what does touch mean to you and what does it mean to somebody else before you can actually start reaching out, being like, hey, this is something that I need. So actually, that's a great exercise for people to do. It's like asking people around you, what does touch mean to you? Because you'd be surprised at how many different answers you would get. So
yeah, that would be very interesting. All right, Epiphany, thank you so much. I enjoyed this.
Thank you for having me, Amy. I really appreciate it.
I was happy to have you here.
Thanks for tuning in to Advancing with Amy, mental health warrior and neurospicy mama, where we delved into the profound impact of human touch with our wonderful guest, Epiphany Jordan. We explored how touch, many times overlooked, can significantly affect our mental and physical health, providing numerous benefits from reducing stress to enhancing our well-being. Epiphany shared her journey from running a hands-on touch business to pursuing a master's in public health, all to uncover ways to integrate touch into broader health conversations. A huge thank you to Epiphany for enlightening our audience on this crucial, yet often neglected topic. For those interested in diving deeper, be sure to visit Epiphany's website, nurturinghumantouch.com, where you can find more resources and links to her book, Somebody Hold Me, The Single Person's Guide to Nurturing Human Touch. Before you go, if you found value in this episode, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends and family. Your support helps us bring more impactful content to the world. Until next time, remember to embrace the power of touch in your journey to emotional wellness. And keep on advancing, warriors.